The summer of 1944 in northern France was a graveyard of twisted steel and shattered dreams. Across the Norman countryside, the remnants of Hitler's once mighty panzer divisions lay scattered like broken toys. Turrets blown clean off their hulls, track links scattered across muddy fields, armor plates bent and punctured by American shells. To most Allied soldiers pushing inland from the beaches, this wreckage represented victory. But to Sergeant Jake Morrison of the 4th Armored Division, staring at the smoking carcass of a Panzer IV through his Sherman's periscope, these twisted hunks of German steel represented something else entirely: salvation. Morrison's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the commander's hatch rim, the acrid smell of cordite and burning diesel fuel filling his nostrils. Just 30 minutes earlier, his platoon had lost 2 Shermans to a concealed Pak-40 anti-tank gun. The 75mm German shells had punched through the American armor like it was made of cardboard, turning 2 crews, 10 good men, into nothing more than charred memories. The screams still echoed in Morrison's ears, mixing with the constant rumble of his Sherman's 4 GAA engine and the metallic clanking of track links rolling over broken cobblestones. "Skipper, we moving out?" The voice belonged to Corporal Tommy Kowalski, Morrison's gunner, his Chicago accent cutting through the engine noise. At 19, Kowalski was the youngest member of the crew, but his steady hands on the 75mm gun had already saved their lives more times than Morrison cared to count. The kid's face, visible in the dim red light of the turret, showed the same haunted expression they all wore now. The look of men who had seen too much death and knew their turn might come at any moment. Morrison keyed his throat microphone, his voice steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Negative, Tommy. We're staying put for now." He turned to scan the battlefield once more, his eyes lingering on the scattered German armor. The Panzer IV's side skirts had been blown off, revealing the thick steel plates underneath. Even damaged, that armor was substantially thicker than anything protecting his Sherman. An idea began to form in Morrison's mind. Crazy, desperate, but maybe just crazy enough to work. The 4th Armored Division had been pushing hard since the breakout from Normandy, spearheading Patton's 3rd Army's drive across France. Their Shermans, officially designated M4A3E8s but known to the crews as Easy 8s, were good tanks, reliable, fast, and mechanically sound. But against German armor, they were death traps. The Sherman's 76mm gun could penetrate most German tanks at reasonable range, but the reverse was devastatingly true. A Tiger I could punch through Sherman armor from over a mile away, while the American tanks had to get dangerously close to have any hope of penetrating German steel. Morrison had lost count of how many burning Shermans he'd seen in the past month. The statistics were grim. The average lifespan of a Sherman crew in combat was measured in weeks, not months. Every morning brought fresh replacements, young faces that would be gone by evening, replaced by newer, even younger faces. The cycle seemed endless, and Morrison was tired of writing letters to mothers and wives he'd never meet. "Driver, back us into that barn," Morrison ordered, pointing toward a half-collapsed stone building about 50 yards to their rear. Private Eddie Sanchez, their bow gunner and assistant driver, acknowledged with a grunt. The Sherman lurched backward, its tracks churning up mud and debris as Sanchez maneuvered the 30-ton beast with surprising delicacy. As they settled into the concealment of the ruined barn, Morrison made his decision. "Tommy, break out the cutting torch. We're going shopping." The next hour was spent in what could only be described as battlefield scavenging. Morrison led his crew across the littered field, dodging the occasional sniper bullet while they examined the German wrecks. The Panzer IV's frontal armor was too damaged to be useful, but the side plates were intact. Thick slabs of hardened steel that had protected German crews for thousands of miles across Europe. Kowalski ran his hands over the metal, his gunner's eye automatically calculating angles and thicknesses. "This stuff's gotta be at least 3 inches thick, Sarge. Maybe more. Our frontal armor's only 2.5. "That's the idea, kid." Morrison hefted a crowbar, testing the weight of a partially detached armor plate. "Help me get this loose." The work was backbreaking. German armor wasn't designed to come apart easily, and the crew had to use cutting torches, crowbars, and pure muscle to separate usable pieces from the wrecked tanks. By evening, they had accumulated a small pile of armor plates, track links, and steel fragments, enough raw material to begin their experiment. The real challenge came when they returned to the division's maintenance area. Master Sergeant Bill O'Malley, the senior mechanic, took one look at the pile of German steel and shook his head in disgust. O'Malley was a career soldier, a man who believed in regulations, proper procedures, and doing things by the book. The idea of welding enemy armor onto American tanks struck him as somewhere between heresy and insanity. "Morrison, what in the hell do you think you're doing?" O'Malley's Boston accent was thick with disapproval as he gestured at the pile of scrap metal. You can't just start bolting random pieces of steel onto a perfectly good Sherman. There are weight limits, balance considerations, structural integrity issues. With respect, Sergeant, there are also dead crew considerations, Morrison interrupted, his voice carrying an edge that made O'Malley step back. I've lost too many good men to German guns. If this scrap metal can stop even one shell that would have killed my boys, then it's worth whatever problems it might cause. The argument that followed was heated but brief. O'Malley had his regulations, but Morrison had something more powerful. The desperate determination of a man who had watched too many friends die. In the end, a compromise was reached. Morrison's crew could modify their tank, but they would do the work themselves, using their own time and materials. If the modifications caused mechanical problems or compromised the tank's performance, they would be responsible for fixing it. And so began one of the most unusual engineering projects of World War II. Working by lamplight in the maintenance shed, Morrison's crew began the painstaking process of welding German armor plates to their Sherman's hull. The work was crude by peacetime standards, rough welds, uneven spacing, and a complete disregard for aesthetic considerations. But it was effective. The first plate went on the front glacis, angled to deflect incoming rounds. Kowalski, who had worked in his father's welding shop before the war, handled most of the torch work, his steady hands laying down bead after bead of molten steel. The additional armor added nearly 2 tons to the tank's weight, but the Ford engine seemed to handle the extra load without complaint. Word of Morrison's project spread quickly through the division. Some crews laughed, calling the modified Sherman a Frankentank or Morrison's monster. Others watched with interest, especially those who had lost friends to German anti-tank guns. A few began collecting their own piles of scrap metal, just in case. The real test came 3 days later, during an assault on the village of Chambois. Morrison's platoon was tasked with supporting an infantry advance through the narrow streets, where German Panzerfausts and hidden anti-tank guns turned every corner into a potential death trap. The modified Sherman, now officially designated Iron Maiden by its crew, rumbled through the village streets with its patchwork armor gleaming dully in the morning sun. The first Panzerfaust struck the tank's left side, where a section of Panzer IV armor had been welded over the original Sherman plating. The shaped charge warhead, designed to penetrate standard Allied armor, struck the angled German steel and detonated prematurely. Instead of punching through to the crew compartment, the explosion merely scorched the paint and left a shallow crater in the improvised armor. "Holy shit, it worked!" Kowalski's voice crackled over the intercom, a mixture of amazement and relief. The bastard thing actually worked! But there was no time to celebrate. A second Panzerfaust streaked toward them from a building to their right, this one aimed at the turret. Morrison ducked instinctively as the rocket-propelled grenade struck a welded-on section of track links that his crew had attached as additional protection. The explosion was deafening inside the tank, but when the smoke cleared, they were still alive and fighting. The battle for Chambois lasted 6 hours, and by the end of it, Iron Maiden had taken 17 direct hits from various German weapons. 7 of those hits would have been fatal to a standard Sherman, but the improvised armor had deflected or absorbed the impacts. Morrison's crew emerged from the fight shaken but alive, their faith in German engineering, ironically, stronger than ever. And you? What would you have done in Morrison's place up to this point? Would you have risked your crew's lives on an untested modification, or stuck with standard equipment and tactics? News of Iron Maiden's success spread through the 4th Armored Division like wildfire. Within a week, half the tanks in Morrison's battalion were sporting some form of improvised armor. The modifications varied wildly. Some crews welded on track links in elaborate patterns, others bolted steel plates at odd angles, and a few enterprising tankers even attached sections of German concrete fortifications to their hulls. The phenomenon wasn't limited to Morrison's unit. Reports began filtering in from other divisions, other armies, describing similar modifications. American ingenuity, it seemed, had found a way to turn German strength against itself. The very armor that had protected panzer crews was now shielding their enemies. But success came with a price. The additional weight-strained engines and transmissions, reducing the tank's operational range and increasing fuel consumption. The crude welds sometimes cracked under stress, sending fragments of metal flying around the crew compartment. Most seriously, the modifications made the tanks top-heavy, increasing the risk of rollovers on steep terrain. These problems came to a head during the advance toward the German border in September 1944. Morrison's platoon was crossing a muddy field when one of the modified Shermans, overloaded with improvised armor, became stuck in a shell crater. The crew spent 4 hours trying to extract the tank while under sporadic artillery fire, finally abandoning it when German infantry began closing in. The incident prompted an official investigation by division headquarters. Colonel James Patterson, the 4th Armored's commanding officer, was a West Point graduate who believed in proper procedures and standardized equipment. The sight of his tanks covered in welded-on German scrap metal offended his sense of military order. "Sergeant Morrison," Patterson's voice was cold as he reviewed the after-action reports in his command tent. "Your unauthorized modifications have resulted in the loss of a valuable tank and nearly cost the lives of 5 men. I'm ordering you to remove all non-standard armor from your vehicle immediately." Morrison stood at attention, his face carefully neutral despite the anger building in his chest. "Sir, with respect, that armor has saved more lives than its cost. My crew has survived engagements that would have killed us in a standard Sherman." "That may be true, Sergeant, but discipline and standardization are more important than individual survival. We cannot have every crew modifying their equipment according to their personal preferences. It leads to chaos and compromises our operational effectiveness." The argument that followed was heated but one-sided. Patterson had the authority of rank and regulation on his side, while Morrison had only the desperate logic of a man trying to keep his friends alive. In the end, orders were orders, and Morrison was forced to comply. But removing the armor proved easier said than done. The crude welds had fused the German steel to the Sherman's hull in ways that made separation difficult without damaging the original armor. Some plates had to be cut away with torches, leaving ugly scars on the tank's surface. Others were so thoroughly integrated that removal would have required major reconstruction. The compromise solution satisfied no one. About half the improvised armor was removed, leaving Iron Maiden looking like a partially molted snake. The remaining plates were officially designated as field expedient modifications and grudgingly accepted by headquarters. Thank you for staying with us this far. The most decisive moment of this story is still to come. The true test of Morrison's innovation came during the Battle of the Bulge in December 1944. Hitler's last desperate offensive caught the Allied forces off guard, and the 4th Armored Division found itself fighting for its life in the frozen forests of Belgium. The weather was brutal, temperatures well below freezing, snow that turned to ice under tank tracks, and a bone-chilling wind that seemed to cut through steel and flesh alike. Morrison's platoon was part of the relief force racing to break the siege of Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne was surrounded, and running low on ammunition and medical supplies. The narrow roads through the Ardennes were perfect tank country for the defenders. Every hill could hide a PA-40. Every tree line might conceal a Tiger tank waiting in ambush. On December 22nd, Iron Maiden was leading a column of Shermans through a valley south of Bastogne when the Germans sprang their trap. The first indication of trouble was a flash of light from the ridgeline, followed by the distinctive crack of a high-velocity gun. The lead tank in the column, a standard Sherman without modifications, erupted in flames as an 88mm shell punched through its frontal armor. "Contact front!" Morrison's voice cut through the radio chatter as he traversed his turret toward the muzzle flash. "Tiger tank, ridgeline, 11 o'clock!" The German tank was a Tiger I, one of the most feared weapons in the Wehrmacht's arsenal. Its 80mm gun could penetrate any Allied tank at ranges exceeding a mile, while its thick frontal armor was virtually immune to return fire. In a straight fight, 5 Shermans might be needed to take down a single Tiger, and that was if they were lucky. But Morrison wasn't planning a straight fight. "Driver, hard left, get us into those trees." Iron Maiden lurched sideways as Sanchez threw the tank into a skidding turn, the tracks fighting for purchase on the icy ground. A second 80mm shell screamed past the turret, close enough that Morrison could feel the heat of its passage. The modified Sherman crashed through the tree line, branches scraping against the improvised armor with a sound like fingernails on a chalkboard. Morrison was counting on the German crew's overconfidence. Tiger commanders were used to engaging at long range, where their superior armor and firepower gave them an overwhelming advantage. They weren't expecting an American tank to close the distance. "Tommy, load HVAP," Morrison ordered, referring to the high-velocity armor-piercing rounds that were the Sherman's best hope against heavy German armor. "We're going to get one shot at this, so make it count." The next few minutes were a deadly game of cat and mouse through the frozen forest. The Tiger crew, realizing their prey had escaped the killing ground, began moving to reacquire their target. Morrison could hear the rumble of the German tank's engine, the distinctive whine of its transmission as it maneuvered for a clear shot. Iron Maiden burst from the tree line at point-blank range, less than 100 yards from the Tiger's flank. At this distance, even a Sherman 76mm gun could penetrate the German tank's side armor. Kowalski's shot was perfect, striking the Tiger just behind the drive sprocket. The armor-piercing round punched through the steel plating and detonated inside the engine compartment, sending flames shooting from the tank's rear deck. But the Tiger wasn't finished. Even as smoke poured from its engine, the massive turret began to traverse toward Iron Maiden. Morrison knew they had seconds before the 88-meter gun could bear on them, seconds that would determine whether his crew lived or died. The Tiger's shot came just as Morrison ordered evasive action. The 88-meter shell struck Iron Maiden's turret at an oblique angle, hitting one of the welded-on sections of Panzer IV armor. The German steel, designed to protect against exactly this type of projectile, absorbed most of the impact. Instead of penetrating the turret and killing the crew, the shell deflected upward, leaving only a deep gouge in the improvised armor. "Jesus Christ, we're still alive!" Sanchez's voice was high with adrenaline and disbelief. "That should have killed us." Morrison didn't waste time celebrating. "Tommy, finish him." The second shot struck the Tiger's ammunition storage, and the German tank disappeared in a massive explosion that shook the ground for hundreds of yards around. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but a crater and scattered pieces of steel. The engagement lasted less than 5 minutes, but its implications would resonate for months. Word of Iron Maiden's victory spread throughout the division, then the Corps, then the entire Third Army. Here was proof that American ingenuity could overcome German technological superiority, that a crew of mechanics and farm boys could take the enemy's own weapons and turn them into instruments of Allied victory. More importantly, the battle demonstrated the life-saving potential of improvised armor. Analysis of the Tiger's shell showed that it would have easily penetrated a standard Sherman turret, killing or wounding the entire crew. The welded-on German armor had made the difference between life and death. By the end of the Bulge offensive, nearly every tank in the 4th Armored Division carried some form of field modification. The practice spread to other units, other armies, until improvised armor became an unofficial standard throughout the European theater of operations. Estimates suggest that these modifications saved the lives of over 1,500 American tankers during the final months of the war. The irony wasn't lost on anyone involved. German steel, forged in the Ruhr Valley to protect the Third Reich's armored forces, was now shielding American crews as they drove toward Berlin. Hitler's war machine was literally being turned against itself, one welded plate at a time. Morrison survived the war, returning to his home in Ohio with a chest full of medals and memories he would carry for the rest of his life. Iron Maiden was scrapped in 1946, its improvised armor cut away and sold for scrap metal. But the lessons learned from Morrison's desperate experiment lived on, influencing the development of reactive armor, spaced armor, and other defensive technologies that protect tank crews to this day. The story of the Shermans represents more than just battlefield ingenuity. It's a testament to the power of human creativity under extreme pressure. When faced with superior enemy technology and mounting casualties, American tank crews didn't simply accept their fate. They adapted, improvised, and overcame, using the enemy's own weapons against them. In the end, Morrison's gamble paid off in ways he never could have imagined. What started as a desperate attempt to save his own crew became a division-wide phenomenon that saved hundreds of lives. The German scrap metal that littered the battlefields of France became the salvation of American tankers, proving once again that in war, as in life, necessity truly is the mother of invention. The modified Shermans were never officially recognized by the War Department, and no technical manuals were ever written describing their construction. But in the memories of the men who fought in them, these improvised monsters represented something more valuable than any official recognition. They represented hope. Hope that ingenuity could triumph over technology, that determination could overcome superior firepower, and that ordinary soldiers could find extraordinary solutions to impossible problems. If you want more real stories of American tank crews and their improbable field modifications, consider subscribing to this channel, leaving your like, and commenting on what impressed you most about this operation. It really helps this type of content reach more people who appreciate these forgotten stories of battlefield innovation and the ordinary heroes who made them possible.